Welcome to Between Two Psychs, a podcast where two psychologists and board-approved supervisors deep dive into many of the questions and challenges that provisional psychologists and early career therapists face in everyday practice, during training, throughout the internship, and beyond as they progress into working more independently. Your hosts, Isabelle Tombleson and Claire Trevitt, talk about a range of topics specifically relating to psychologists and therapists who are just starting out. We are back for our third episode on dissociation with our guest Jo Canine, who will introduce herself for those of you who haven't listened to previous episodes. So hi Jo, and welcome back.
Howdy. Welcome back everybody, hopefully. Jo Canine, yes, I work at Guided Healing Psychology, which is my own private practice. I'm generally registered and a board-approved supervisor. I primarily work with people with dissociative disorders and complex trauma and multiplicity or dissociative identity disorder, and a few clients, more than a few, survivors of cults or high control groups.
Yes, at that quite extreme end of dissociation.
Yes, I continue to just niche, and I'm like, I don't know how I can niche anymore. I'm sure I can. We'll give it a couple of years, but yeah.
Yeah, and as we've talked about before, dissociation can feel very complex. It can feel very scary. So Jo has really broken this down for us and helped to demystify this. And today we're going to talk a little bit about ways to work with dissociation. Because I'm sure most of us, I mean, as Jo has said in previous episodes, we're all working with dissociation. It's a human experience. So, how do we work with people at that more sort of extreme end?
Slowly, as hopefully, we've listened to other episodes, but understanding dissociation on, more pathological side is a response, as is, say, flight and fight, to trauma or extreme distress. So if we're working with more, severe levels of dissociation, we're working with severe trauma for this particular individual or multiple who's sitting in front of us. So we understand that we're working with them slowly, even though we might only be afforded, say, 10 sessions or monthly or something, and there might be a sense of urgency to get well and get well quickly. That's just not the reality. And, we're doing long-term work with this client, and so we can slow down. Each session doesn't have to be major light bulbs and big things. If at the end of the day the client leaves the room or ends the Zoom session and it was a positive experience, that's awesome. That is part of the process. So working slowly and understanding that each time we're in the room, the relationship is a major part of the therapeutic intervention. And that in any healthy relationship, that takes time to build. So yes, again, only afforded 10 sessions for the year. That's technically only 10 hours. You think of our friends or even our family, we might be spending 10 hours with them in a week, or our partners. That has to be spread over a year. So it really is us taking things a little slower or a lot slower and understanding the benefit and how amazing the relationship can be without thinking of any other modalities we're using, that we're working with a person who's likely been wounded significantly by people. So
I love the way that you've said that, because that brings us back to something that we've all been trained to do and that we can all really focus on. So if we really just sit with the fact that we know how to do that part.
How to people, which can be hard because we're most of us are pretty good at that in our private lives, and then we add our psychology hat on. It's like, what do I do now? So I really encourage, all psychologists working in this space you live under the hat. There's the psych hat, and then there's you, and the client's connecting with you, the psychology hat, but you, not the hat, because the hat's inanimate. Psychologist is a role. They're connecting with you, the psychologist. And so, how do you connect as humans? And sometimes it could be, oh, I'm not sure what we're going to do today. And that's totally fine. Sometimes I don't know what we're doing for the day. And how do you work with that not knowing what to do? And that be toolkit, bring it out, let's do this.
Yeah, and not putting pressure on ourselves to, have all the answers or have some clear agenda, because also my guess is that when you're working with levels of dissociation, you don't necessarily know, which part's going to come into the room at any one time. So my guess is clients may present differently for different sessions, depending on their level of need or their level of comfort at the time.
Well, if we're working with DID or multiplicity, technically they're all showing up because they're all in the physical body. It's who's engaging with you directly. So I'm always thinking whether they're a singlet, so someone without dissociative identities, or multiple, just because there's a singular body in front of me doesn't mean I don't have multiple parts of consciousness or, individual identities internally. So if I think of it as, and I did it very early on, I don't do it anymore because I don't need to, but sometimes I used to put pillows on the couch and then just pretend like each pillow is a person. And so if I'm talking, that was just a cue. When I was provisionally registered, I have multiples on board, this pillow as if it were another client. And so it was just a prompt for me to remind myself, if I'm talking to two individual bodies, say a couple, I have to think about how I speak to build relationship with both.
Yeah.
And these are two totally individual, separate people. The same would be if we're working with a multiple, that I'm building a relationship with a number of individuals who will have different experiences, beliefs, opinions. And so if I align to someone I'm talking to, say if it's same with couple, if I align to this partner, I might lose this partner. And then I'm in couples therapy, that's not helpful. So how do I do that? And so learning those I don't know if it's a soft skill. I don't even know what a soft or hard skill. I think the taco ad. But understanding that there's modality and then there's the skill set, and that you can work with clients without modality for quite some time using skill set, and then you just add in stuff from modality into that.
So there's lots of relationship building.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe different types of relationship building, but also there's a sense of wanting to create some kind of harmony in the relationships that you're building with clients.
Yes. So in the same way, if it was family therapy and you've got two parents, or even four if it's a different family structure, you're working with quite a few people in the room, and the client might be an individual, like a child, but what we're working with is a relationship dynamic that influences this particular's well-being. And if I only focused on that individual, then I'm not really helping them because they exist in an environment of multiple relationships. Same goes for internal relationships, whether it be singular, and we're working from, say, IFS, which is more singular focus, parts work, or being multiple. This is a dynamic of multiple relationships. So I can't forget that whilst one part, say if it's IFS or whatever, one part might be very angry at an external person, there might be another part that is not angry at all. So if I go, yeah, that was really hurtful what they said, might mean this person, if it's multiplicity or this part of consciousness, there might be a barrier because now there's an alignment potentially through there. So it is understanding that dynamic that which can be quite a lot to cognitively process in real time. That's as well why we take things slow. Because, yeah.
Yes, it sounds like we're trying to build relationships with, I mean, with the different parts of consciousness, but we're also wanting those parts of consciousness to create some relationship with each other as well, and some level of harmony with each other as well.
Yes. So I can't remember the third C, but it's like internal cohesion. So that kind of, working together, internal communication. And so there is, whatever that means, doesn't have to be I hear it audibly. It could be a sensing of things. It could just be a knowing. And then there's the co-consciousness.
Yeah.
So if it's the multiplicity, so there'd be less amnestic barrier or dissociative barrier. And so how do I do all of those, which is an implication of this, two or more? I then, as therapists, have to work in building relationship with two or more and hold that all in your brain space in the moment of who am I talking to right now, who else might be listening actively, how might that ripple into there, and still respond in a time frame that doesn't seem like Joe's off with the fairies because I'm doing all the processing. So it can be taxing, but highly rewarding. But yes, for me, the relationship is the focus with therapist and client and the internal relationships.
And it sounds like you're also maybe holding the needs of all of these different sort of parts of consciousness as well concurrently. So you're trying to hold all of that in the space.
In real time.
Yeah.
Hence the constant encouragement for supervision and ongoing supervision. If it's a once-off to understand, say, what is DID, how do I understand that, cool, and then, off we go. But because it's such complex work and not necessarily scary, I think there's, in previous episodes, we've, talked about that it can be really scary. And, I prompt folks who do feel fear in working with DID, what is so scary about it? Is there misinformation in that? Again, it's so rare I won't see it, or folks with DID are dangerous. And that's all misinformation. So just unpacking maybe with their supervisor, is there something about working with DID or, higher levels of dissociation that's based in misinformation? And then, I can release that because that's not actually, it's not real. They're not dangerous, or it's not super rare. And then we're more available to be a present therapist.
But even though it's not scary, it's still quite taxing because you're holding a
It,
lot. So it's quite taxing on the therapist because you're doing the work of you're building multiple relationships really at once, yeah, and holding
yeah,
the
I
need.
find it taxing. I don't know if other folks have found it taxing, therapists. I mostly don't write notes, clinical notes. Say if I've got 5 different headmates around, and there's Bill, Bob, Daisy, etc. I'm not necessarily going to write Bob said this, Bill said this, Daisy said this, because that's not necessary. I'd rather be present. And so for me, it's about holding everybody in my brain, that there is Bill, Bob, Ben, Daisy, and then building that narrative of who everybody is. And then say over time, work with someone for a couple of years, Daisy may no longer be Daisy. Daisy and Ben might fuse together, and now I have Trevor, and I go, wait, that's right, Daisy and Ben, and then over here. And so that can be taxing there, but extremely rewarding. And I don't know the right word to describe it. Fun is not the right word, but there is opportunity to be creative in a way that, we might not get if we're working with standard manualized treatment for, say, depression. There's a little less creativity because you're working with so many people that we might work with a child and then 2 minutes later an adolescent and then an old man, and I get to be creative in how do I bring myself into helping all of those different people.
Yeah, because like you say, you could be working across the lifespan, really, even though the individual in front of you might be 35 years old, you might actually be working with internally with across the full lifespan.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. So the relationship really feels like it's the primary factor to start with. We really want to focus on taking that time to build the relationship, to build that connection, to build that attunement. And that's something that we all, I mean, I say it's something that we all know how to do. I do sometimes wonder whether our training, having gone through like a psychodynamic training myself, there's such an emphasis on the therapeutic relationship. And I
Mm.
think sometimes when we go to trainings, there's a sense of we need to build rapport with clients, but it's not necessarily unpacked how we do that. So
Mm.
I think if people are sitting with, yeah, I know how to build rapport, but what does that really look like? Again, getting some supervision around that because it's an assumed skill, I think. And
Mm.
I think we all know how to build rapport, but developing that therapeutic relationship, I think, can become an assumed skill. And if that's something that you're feeling like you might need more support with, then getting supervision around that, I think, could also be
Mm.
helpful in any context.
Very much so. And understanding there's certain criteria maybe in working in the more extreme or severe end in rapport building around uh, you need to hit certain things of in order for this relationship to develop. I need to be super consistent because we're working in extreme trauma versus there's less need. There's still need for it, but if I compare the extremes of your manualized treatment for mild depression versus dissociative identities, to be consistent because the interpersonal trauma is a factor here versus maybe not so much here. And so it needs to be extremely consistent and maybe, you know, steering away from the word safe for a long time because safe is unsafe. So if I'm safe person, that could be seen as highly manipulative, even though my attempt is for rapport building. So understanding the nuances with each um, presentation, how to do the rapport building, that it isn't rapport building, as you say, it's just rapport building. The presentation might then shift how I attempt to rapport build. Um,
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the word safety because I think we all in the business are trying to cultivate safety. I mean, I think that's a primary factor for most clinicians, but when we when we specify that it's a safe space, I think that when clients have experienced significant trauma, that can be quite triggering because actually nowhere's safe initially. We hope that they will learn to
mm,
feel safe with us, but I think that there is an assumption I always have that the client is not going to walk in and feel safe with me.
mm,
That would be quite unrealistic for me to expect that. But to continue to cultivate that and hope that over time they can develop that trust and safety in me, that to me would feel like I was doing my job.
mm,
They can feel a little bit safer each time. But I think when we explicitly say this is a safe space, I think, as you say, clients they might not take that in. They might not believe it. And then I think it could lead to them thinking, well, maybe we don't really understand what they've been through. So I think I would
mm,
be more likely to say to somebody, you know, you may not feel safe here. You may not trust me initially, and that's okay. But I hope that over
mm,
time you might learn to.
mm. Or if, session one, as you say, and someone's unfortunately experienced interpersonal trauma or significant, this is a safe space, might sound kind of gaslighty. I don't know this space. How could you say that? So is this a just trust me where I don't have experience in that? I tend to go, practically, instead of safe and trust, do you feel comfortable? Is there enough respect here? And then if there's that, then we can build on the idea of safe not being concrete or binary, that it's a spectrum. Do you feel safe enough to be here in session with me? And then sometimes even the idea of safe enough, because the word safe is there, is too much. Do we feel comfortable enough to have a conversation about anything? yes, because if I can ask a question, you can answer the question, then it's a yes. And then how do we build that to maybe then hit the word safe? Or do we respect each other enough? So maybe there's not trust, because how can you develop trust without experience? Is there enough respect to then be able to set a boundary? Yes, and feel like it's going to be respected. And then maybe we can get to, do you trust enough in the process versus trust me? And so it's like slowly working towards those things and less binary ideas, especially if our clients, again, are literal thinkers. No, this isn't safe. As you said, nowhere's safe. So if it's safe or unsafe, and I don't know you to know if it's safe, automatically you're unsafe. Well, that just kind of makes it really unhelpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's really, really important in terms of, I guess, being attuned as well to our clients' experience.
Mm.
The other thing I was going to ask you is in terms, so we're talking about the relationship, but I mean, are there particular therapies? I know that there are therapies like IFS, which internal family systems, which focuses on very much on different parts of self and works with those parts of self. Are there any particular therapies that are recommended for working with dissociative identity disorder, in particular, and some that have been more researched than others? Or, I mean, are there a range of therapies that people may be able to apply what they're already learning in
It's an
the,
excellent question.
yeah.
So it depends on how you use IFS. IFS was most of the feedback I've gotten from the community, the dissociative identity community, is if done in a standard way, it can be quite non-affirming because there are parts of you and missing that they are individual identities versus just parts of whatever the legal name is, and so that can be quite a pushback. So it depends on whether it's an affirming use of IFS versus your standard IFS. In my work, I use any modality I've ever been trained in, or that I read about that is appropriate to use at that level. So if you're working with DID, you're working with multiple people, internal people, folks, however they prefer to be identified. So if I'm working with Bill and Ben, internal headmates, and they're having conflict, what would I do if it were a couple?
Okay.
I might do some Gottman. I've done Gottman. I'm level 1 trained. Maybe I can use rapport. And then there's a skills there because it's internal communication, one of the C's. I don't need to have a DID specific training,
Mm-hmm.
but I need to have an understanding of DID in order to apply it in an affirming way. So it might be that, or it could be, a lot of people say CBT doesn't work for DID. It does if it's affirming. So if I'm working with just Bill, I could do some thought challenging. But if I do it with Bill and Bill's the legal name and I'm assuming singularity when it's not, then that's not going to be affirming because that thought we're challenging might be an individual internally, and I don't want to challenge an individual internally assuming it's Bill's thought when it's actually Ben's thought, because I'm not challenging if it was, Bill and Heather in the couple, I'm not challenging Heather's thought using Bill as my person to challenge. It's Heather's thought. And I go, no, shush, Heather, go fire that therapist immediately, because then we're not affirming that there are multiple individuals in the room with us. So it's kind of understanding who am I working with? What is the framework of understanding? And then all modalities to a degree are available to us. What can I use? And that's where oh my gosh, I can't work with DID, I have to refer on. One, they've probably already worked with DID and not known about it. But if you can work with, the parent and child, you can work with DID. If you can work with an individual and do, relationships work in individual, knowing that it's, how do I communicate with my partner who might not ever show up to the sessions? So how do I work with a relationship where I only get to talk to one person in the relationship? Then you can work with DID, because we might be working with Bill and Ben might not ever engage with you as therapist, but we're still doing relationship work. So it's about
Yeah.
understanding. Almost every psychologist has the capacity to work with DID because they're registered, and there's a lot everybody has to get to be registered. They're highly knowledgeable. It's just understanding that framework, that whilst there's a single body, there's multiple people. And I've had that in supervisions, which is always fun. If this were a couple, what would you do? And they rattle off perfectly what, would be helpful. I go, there it is. Oh, and then once they get it, it's far easier and less confronting to work with because they realize how skilled they actually are. It's just making sure it's affirming.
Wow. No, that's wonderful because again, like you say, in a relationship, you might be working with two individuals and you think about, well, how would you work if there were just two? But you also said about working with in one part of a relationship when the other person's not there. And that's often what we do in therapy anyway, because the person might be bringing in their partner, but the partner's not in the room, but we're still working with that individual in front of us to try and support them in the relationship, even though the other party is not in the room. So it sounds as though a lot of the principles of therapy can be applied here, as long as the conceptual understanding of multiplicity is very clear and who is actually presenting, so that we're very clear about who's presenting and who we're actually supporting with specific interventions, rather than looking at it as just one individual, because
Yeah.
multiple, it's like working with multiple different individuals and knowing who you're working with at each time.
Yes, there was a training for mostly around like RAMCOA or systems like systematic DID. So
Spell out.
RAMCOA, so ritual abuse, mind control, organized abuse. So cult high control groups. Um, and it's freely available on YouTube. And she described it as imagining you're working with like quadruplets and they're all identical. She said twins, but there's always more than two. But you're working with one, and then you might blink, and as you're blinking, imagine like a slow blink, one goes out and one comes back in, and so they look the exact same because just genetically they are, but you're working with a totally different individual. You're not going to just go, well, I'm just going to give you the exact same treatment as your brother because why not? You look the same. So it's the same with DID. Just because we look the same on the outside, not we as in me, I'm singlet, but and I use humour sometimes. I don't know who I'm speaking to. We all look the same to me. Visually, they might use the face different or the sounds or gestures, but I'm not going to use that if I'm working with identical twins and they're both in the room. I'm not going to give them the exact same treatment because I know visually they're separate individuals. But if we can get past that in that there's one physical body and make it affirming, then it's far simpler to then go, okay, I feel more confident to work with this presentation moving forward. And then once you get it, you start to see how non-affirming other things are, and then hopefully pass along that, framework. But I have my book, if I can plug that, the DBT for DID. So there hadn't been, I read an article a long time ago, and it was published on adapting, DBT for folks with dissociative identities, and it had just discussed it, and yet I couldn't find an adaptation of this anywhere. So why not do it myself? So that came out earlier in this year to really adapt in an affirming way. Like,
What's your book called, please?
Dialectical Behavior Therapy for DID. It's on Amazon, available in multiple countries through North Atlantic Books in the US. But just this idea of, say the client who has dissociative identities goes to hospital, it's an inpatient program, and let's do wise mind, which is, say the emotion and the logic, but that's an assumption of singularity, that the emotion and logic are still one and can be integrated, Whereas if we have two headmates, if they don't want to talk to each other, we can't create wise mind because they don't want to integrate. So how do we do wise mind? So it's kind of affirming that we're working with multiple, and there's a lot more of that relational work with these skills.
And
But I
so
think
it's an adaptation of how you can actually use the skills that you're taught in DBT to working with multiple.
yeah. So not everything, because the DBT handbook's like a million pages. So I
Okay.
took what I could,
Yeah.
so that people can, buy it themselves, and if they don't have the privilege of affording therapy or, regular therapy, they can do it themselves. So it's not super triggering because it's not about trauma; it's about skills. Or if the therapist is like, I need some prompts, they can, do it with clients. But yeah, integrating, if I can't do body-based um, grounding, that's okay. That it's not there's something wrong or you're being resistant. That maybe that's something to do with you're okay with it, but Bill's not okay with it. How do we understand and affirm that maybe dialectic internally versus it is singularity and we have to integrate the dialectic? We're treating it as two separate people. How do we just mash them together? So yeah, it's
It sounds like being really flexible and adapting what maybe all of us may already know to some extent, and adapting some of the tools that we know work really well in practice and making them affirming in the context of an individual who has multiple parts of consciousness.
a system. So a person, a physical body with multiples inside, but like acknowledging that each internal part, identity, headmate, is real and not just an angry version of a singular consciousness. They have their own life experience that is different. So their opinions, their perspectives are different. Their responses are going to be different, and acknowledging that and working with versus how do we make one treatment so it is just convenient
Not a
in
one
that sense.
size fits all.
Yeah,
It's an adapting to the system and the parts within that system.
yeah.
Not sure if my terminology is completely accurate here, but I feel like I'm understanding the concept here. But I'm noticing that the there's obviously a specific language, and I guess where would people educate themselves around that? Because that's part of being affirming, isn't it? It's part of
Mm.
so where would people go to educate themselves around the language, around working with a dissociative um, identity, somebody with a dissociative identity disorder, and knowing that we are going to present in an affirming way?
So there should be like dictionaries online. I think you can Google them from folks with lived experience.
Mm,
In my ebook, I've added that. So if anyone gets the ebook and how to work with multiplicity, that's part of it so that they don't have to go searching. It's there. It's a general dictionary. So,
yeah.
alter is okay for some, which is just short for alternate state of consciousness because they're alternate to each other. But
Yeah.
some people don't like that. Part could be okay, but that might then align with singular IFS stock standard part and then not acknowledgement of the realness of individual. I go with headmate because I just think like a shipmate, a headmate, everyone's, in there together. Um, some people don't like that. So it's figuring out what the standard is and then working in a shared dictionary almost of what resonates and what's most respectful.
So it's about creating that with the client as well. Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. But having a starting point because when people, it's quite new for people, having a starting point of where to get that. But that's great that it's in your ebook, and I'll get the link to that. So I'm going to get the links to all of these books and resources that Joe has mentioned, and I'll put those in the show notes for people. I feel like we could go on for hours here. There's so much. Really, really appreciate your time, Joe. But I think we'll leave it there for today. And I just really, really appreciate everything that you have shared with people, because I think it's going to be new information that's going to be incredibly helpful for people, particularly early career psychs, but also, as you say, people with a lot of experience that may have been working with individuals, at all levels.
Already.
Yeah.
Yes. So think about your clients. Maybe go do a DES with them and see. Maybe you've been working with multiple this whole time and not realized it. But yeah, and it very much encourage to source resources that are based in lived experience or worked with lived experience. Like the DBT book I did, consult with folks with lived experience because I'm singular. Obviously not named anyone for privacy reasons, but I think it's really important in the same way we're doing with any part of the affirming space. Is it not without us? I can't remember off the top of my head. But if we're going to do research, if we're going to produce these things, if people are going to read resources, it's important to have lived experience voices be part of it. Otherwise, if I don't do that, who am I to say what your experience is? I've never had it. I never will have it. I need to have that understanding that there's a limit to my expertise because I don't have lived experience. So
Mhm.
I can, provide a few other names that maybe we haven't gone through of spaces that have really amazing resources that consult with or have lived experience voices included.
I think that's a really good point, because we really do owe it to the clients that we serve to be as educated as we can be, and that's how we get this information. And when we're learning something new, we may not always get it right, but I think if we are on the road to trying to make of therapy across the board as affirming as it can be for all of the individuals that we serve, then I think that's it's incredibly important. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, and I know that I'm now going to go away and look that up, because actually I feel that that's really important, and I know that perhaps my language here isn't going to be the I'm probably not using the terms that will be seen as the most affirming within the community, and that's something that I really want to bring. So I'm encouraging other people to do the same there, because we're all learning on this journey.
Mm. And
So
the language changes as the communities change. Recently the is it the plural? So there's DID Awareness Day or Multiplicity Awareness Day, and then there's appreciation. I can't remember off the top of my head. My brain's just gone numb. But there's 2 days, and there's a flag for DID. That's recently I was educated, which is really helpful. On like Instagram, people reach out going, "Hey Joe, this isn't, this is triggering for a few people," and then I get educated. So I get it wrong too, even though I've been in the space for a long time. But uh, uh, we're always learning. There's an evolution of what feels most respectful, being an ally versus inside the community. So
yeah, and trying to get it right, I think, really conveys the right message, because we may not always get it right, but I think when we own it when we don't, or we're willing to be corrected.
the rupture repair.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then we learn from that, and hopefully then the next time we're educating ourselves and others often along the way. So I do think that's really important, and I'm really pleased that you've shared that with us. Thank you so much. And so I'll put all of those links into the show notes. I think there'll be a fairly substantial list now. And
Sorry.
anyone looking for more information, there you go. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps others find the show. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Between Two Psychs for more updates and resources. For more information and to explore everything we offer, head over to our website, betweentwopsychs.com.au. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.